Hello and welcome to Yellow Card Vanguard. My name is Zystral, and today we have a deck profile. No, it's been a while since we've done one of those, right? This is the Loronerol deck, the standard that I took to top 4 in the NA BRO that just went past. This video's coming out a little bit late, and that's mainly because A, I've been lazy, and B, I just don't like recording deck profiles, but it's been asked for, so here I'm going to explain the choices and why my list isn't quite so standard as you might see other of Loronerol decks. Discuss a little bit about my matchups and just go from there. So let's just jump straight into it. As you can see down here, we have the ride line, which is just a straight 4 Loronerols. Everyone's going to run that. And of course, to round it off, we've got 3 more copies of the grade 3 that we can persona ride at the max number. Persona riding is really great. It gives your rearguards the ability to hit numbers more effectively. And because you have your order which stands your rearguard, that plus 10k will get used multiple times. Next up, we have the orders. So the first one is the important one, which is 6 Flower Fractal. This is the one that restands your board, gives your Vanguard huge power, which when combined with the Sentinel Restrict becomes really, really lethal. You have to have 4 copies because it's the only one that you don't search for. The grade 1 searches the grade 1 order, the grade 2 Loronerol searches the grade 2 order, but the grade 3 doesn't search any orders. So you have to hard draw these to be able to hit your combos. And grade 2 is Matter Red Runway. We're only playing this at 3 of. A lot of lists will play 4. And the reason I find that it's just not as necessary is because it's only really good going second. You want to be having it for the on-play draw card, which will help you hit your grade 3 orders. And this effect just isn't live if you're going first, because when you ride grade 3 over grade 2, your opponent's not going to be grade 3 if you went first, so you're going to miss out on that card draw. Having multiple copies is nice because it lets you play that sort of longer game where you're going, okay, 3 crit van, 3 crit van every single turn, but that rarely comes up, and you'll pretty much always want to be playing fractals instead because it can flip up the already 1 copy that you're going to have off of the grade 2. So I've always found 3 to be enough. I've never really needed more. In fact, a lot of the games I played, I ended up discarding just extra copies because I just was never going to play them over a 6-star fractal. And then lastly, rounding off the orders, we have the 1 copy of Romantic Happiness. Just a one-off because you're always going to search it off of this. There are times where you'll damage it or draw into it. Drawing into it's not as bad because you can just play it from hand and draw a card, but damaging it is really, really it's almost game losing. Because not only do you lose out on the draw from Loronerol, but you lose out on an easy way to get the second order face down so that you can sing with Loronerols on attack. In fact, one game I had in top 8, I think it was, or no, top 16, I won because my opponent damaged this on turn 1. And then I lost my top 4 game because I damaged this on turn 1. So yeah, this card's super important. And in fact, there'll be times where you'll be almost tempted to guard on turn 1, just so you don't take it as damage. Like, I'd rather risk guarding and then drawing this than not having it at all. So yeah, super, super important. I can't imagine playing a game without this card. Looking at the grade 2s now, the first most important one is Noah. There's just no reason not to play 4 copies of this. It hits numbers, hits a 50k, and it draws cards when it attacks, which is something that you really need because, especially like I said, going on that first grade 3 turn, you need to different fractal, you're always going to sing Romantic Happiness as long as you haven't damaged it. Noah is going to help you dig into that, which is just really effective. It's one of the reasons that the deck can survive for so long and always have its combo, because you have that search. The next grade 2 is another 4 of, and I'm playing Audrey. Now this is the first choice I'm going to spend a while talking about because this is something that not a lot of people are playing. Any lists that are playing Audrey usually play 3 copies, and then some lists aren't even playing her at all, they're playing Harriet instead, which is the grade 1 version of her. Similar effect, obviously needs 2 orders instead of 1. The reason I like Audrey more than Harriet is twofold. One is you can commit in the early game as an attacker that hits numbers, so you can rush on like turn 2 and turn 3, and then on those same turns, you can intercept it away from 5k shield, which is really useful. It either means that your opponent has to attack into a rear guard, which means you don't have to waste cards in hand to guard with, or you can just intercept early and then leave up holes to play your Eknos and whatnot. The other thing is that because it's active with just 1 order, not 2, like Harriet, you can actually play it on turn 2 and it hits numbers on turn 2. The downsides to not having the Harriet is that sometimes you want to boost your Vanguard with Harriet to make huge numbers, which makes it harder for your opponent to guard the fractal turn. But in my opinion, those situations rarely come up, and having more boosters to put down, you don't really need because you have such huge numbers from just standing 2 rear guards as it is with Persona Ride, that the booster actually hurts more often than it helps. The final grade 2 that we're playing is Elmer. This card's really hailed as the defensive glue of the deck. I'm sorry to make that joke for those of you who get it, but it really does hold the deck together because you've got all this offensive pressure from your orders, your Eknoa, and your Audrey. You need a way to survive that's not just triggers and perfect guards, and Elmer is perfect for that. It uses soul, which you have no other use for in the deck. Just Persona Riding alone will give you all the soul you need to use all 4 of your Elmer. And because of you want to be playing an order every turn already, this card just scales to be like 25, 30k shield if you're having a really good game. And that's 2 to 3 cards worth of economy in just one card, which is, again, combined with Eknoa, is how you see Loronerol develop these massive hands that just very rarely ever die to anything. One of the great things is that it is 9, so it hits under. So if you're trying to, like, say, whatever reason, damage an eye going second, maybe there's a deck that you know that needs counterblast, and you don't want to give them that counterblast, you can swing 9 into the 10k Vanguard and deny, while still having 9k into 8k for the early aggro. In fact, there have been many times where I've given up the 20k or 25k shield to play it on turn 1, to swing 9 into their opponent's 8, and then intercept with it for 10k shield anyway, because I know that it's done its job, it's gotten that early rush off and it's worth it, and that I'm not really going to need that shield going on later on. Generally, I will try and hold on to it because it's the next best guard piece you have, but if you're really struggling for a pinch and you have Persona Ride, it does hit numbers, it is a decent attacker, and it's always there as another body that you need it. So the reason I'm playing at 4 instead of make 12 grade 3s is because even though you have lots of plussing, there's a lot of remove in the format. You've got Baron Magnus, you've got Dragon Empire still popular, you have Meteors is one of those popular decks right now, it won the event. So having all this return on the board, you can kind of assume that your rear guards are never going to live, like your Eknoas, your Audrey, and so on and so forth. And even if they don't get directly retired, a lot of the time you want to be using them to intercept for 5k shield anywhere where you can, because not only does it have a lot of plussing and can refill easily, it also just wants to be able to hold on to as many cards as possible just for emergencies, like a huge Barrow turn or like a Bruce Final Rush combo. You just want to have that guarantee, that safety. So by playing more grade 2s, you can more freely commit stuff to the board and not have to worry about it as much. Finally, of course, like with every deck, we have to play perfect guards. We're playing 4 here. Bermuda perfect guards are all the same. There's no real reason to look at anything else. The only thing is that these are mandatory, is something that I actually realized halfway through day 1, because my opponent was attacking me with, you need 2 more cards to guard because I was facing against Dark States. And I realized that I can't just play one of these to fill the 2 card requirement. There's no cost and there's no once per turn on the auto. So the moment this comes into the Guardian Circle, you have to discard a card. It's mandatory unless you have 2 or less hand, which because of Eknoa, because of all the plussing from your orders, you're never going to have less than 2 cards in your hand when you're guarding, other than you guard it with absolutely everything else and it's the final turn. So there was a slight argument actually to playing the old regular perfect guards from the start deck, because those are optional. You can just put 2 down for a 2 card guard requirement and only discard 1 card. And like I said, you're very rarely ever going to be less cards in hand than needed. So this is actually one situation where playing the old perfect, the regular perfect guards might have actually been a benefit. Then finally, rounding out the normal units of the deck, we have 3 copies of Louisa. The card's really good. It's not amazing, but it's really good. It's an 11k booster, so it's the next biggest one you have access to after Harriet. It only countercharges in the middle lane, and to be honest, I found myself very rarely using this effect. Most of the time, whenever Louisa came in hand, I was discarding it to ride, I was discarding it for Eknoa. The 11k booster just to me doesn't make that huge of a difference. Like I said, with Persona Ride, your Laurel columns are already going to be huge. With Fractal, it's going to be even bigger, so the Sentinel Distract makes even more of a difference. There were some times where 10k did make a difference, but on the whole, I very rarely ever found myself missing it. If anything, the thing I missed the most was the counter charge, because the deck does counterblast quite a lot. You have to counterblast for Eknoa, you're counterblasting for Loronerol every turn, and you have no way of countercharging beyond Louisa, so that does add up. But I think 3 is fine. You definitely don't need 4. It's an 11k booster on the rear guards, on the side lanes as well, so that's one argument why you'd play multiples. But again, it doesn't actually make numbers or anything else, because Audrey hits numbers on her own, 13k, 11 plus 19 is just 20 or 30, so that doesn't really make any magic numbers unless you're swinging at a rear guard. And then Noah already hits 13 Vanguards. It hits 15 magic numbers on 10k rear guards. So again, adding 11 to that is not really that great. The only time I can see the plus 11 being useful is when you're boosting a trigger, which is 5 to make 16, which can hit over big rear guards. But beyond that, I definitely don't ever see myself being the 4th. The only other tech card that I'm not playing that I see being played in the main decks to discuss is, I don't remember her name, but the grade 1 3k that gives something one of your units 10k when placed. That card is absolutely useless. Like, there is no need to play that card. It doesn't boost for any great numbers. Like, sure, it can boost Ekno for 18, but that's such an irrelevant amount. And then pumping your Vanguard 10k, it's just the same as boosting it with a Louisa. And you very rarely ever will need the case where you're having your Vanguard boosted by Louisa and then still need another 10k on top. That's pretty much never going to happen. You're better off just aiming for lower numbers, pushing like tempo with runway, and then just farming up the advantage with Ekno to try again next. Like, it's very rare that 10k will make a difference from the push turn. And you know, being new grade 1s, it's only 5k shield, same with Harriet, so there's not even like that other benefit to playing them. And of course, lastly is all the triggers, so there's not a lot to discuss here. I'm playing this artwork for the Overtrigger because it's drawn by Tanihara Natsuki, the artist of Decapo and the Vert line of prisms, which I'm a big fan of, so I just like that artwork. Triggers, you'll notice, is 7 crit and 4 draw, when most lists are tending towards 8 crit 3 draw. And there's no real correct answer. This was just personal preference. Like, the times that I was playing where I wish I had 8 crit were about the same of the times where I was playing and I was glad I had 4 draw. I was originally actually playing 8 crit 3 draw because I was just net decking some Japanese deck that won an event. But I ended up switching to 4 draw for 2 main reasons. One is that I'm not that lucky despite having come 4th. I could very rarely find my 6 flower fractals on time. So just having that extra draw, 1 in like 10, 15 games, gave me that extra draw to actually find the fractal, which was great. And then the second reason is that it's only 5k shield, unlike the crit, so you feel a lot less bad about discarding it for Ride Deck, you feel less bad about discarding it for Eknoa, and you feel less bad about just putting it onto the body as a 5k boost, or 10k attack with Persona Ride, or 15k boosted with the Overtrigger effect. So I found myself just being able to say, okay, I have the draw trigger in hand, let's just put it onto the board just to push this extra numbers, Let's make Audrey an 18k 28 with Persona Ride, which is now impossible to 1-card guard. Let's just give it that extra push, and sometimes that would ends up winning you the game. Having only 7 crit, I almost never missed the crit trigger. I almost always missed the shield value because sometimes you have a bunch of draws in hand because you just drew into them or whatever. There's no need to discard them for riding, and you don't have Eknoas to discard anymore. So you just end up having to use that as 5k shield. And the value of 5k shield in standard is a lot lower than it used to be, which says a lot about the format. But so I miss the shield value a lot. Very rarely do I miss the crit, because your opponent's usually on like 2 or 3 damage on your first grade 3 turn, because ideally you'll have been rushing them with all your grade 2s, which means that the single matter red is really, really threatening and forcing them to guard. And you can actually play a line where you have double matter red on your second grade 3 turn because you want to save fractal for whatever reason, and then any triggers, any crits you find off of that 3 crit Vanguard swing, which they inevitably guard, can be put onto your rear guards, which are equally threatening. So that's the only time that I've ever missed a crit trigger. But in terms of like crit pressure off the Vanguard, you already have it from just your orders and being able to your regular game plan already force them to guard so much more heavily than they normally would. So having that threat of driving a crit off of the Vanguard swing very rarely ever comes up. Of course, there are times when you're rushing early where the crit is nice, because you're incentivized to attack with Vanguard first anyway because of Overtrigger. So having the crit instead to put on your rear guards when you're rushing can make a world of difference. Just for me, it doesn't come up as nearly as often as just the desperate low-end scenario where I need a booster, I need to discard something to ride from the deck, or ride deck or whatever. So it just feels a little bit better having that crit to get rid of. And as well as that, the numbers are kind of with me on this one because the chance of seeing like a 3-off trigger versus a 4-off trigger is actually, it's not a huge amount, but it's enough for me to go like, oh, I don't like those numbers. And again, like I said, though, there's no right or wrong answer. Like 8 crit, 3 draw is also fine, and you know, a lot of the other lists that popped, both in all regions as well as on my own, were playing 8 crit, 3 draw. I think I'm the only person that was playing 4 draw, but you know, I think there's just enough there's enough merits there, and it's just as good in different ways, of course. Yeah, there's not much else to talk about. Like, in terms of combos, there's not really much combo. You just flip Fractile, stand your rear guards, and go for it. The only thing I want to talk about, slightly in terms of playing the deck, is the use of Eknoa. This actually came up in one of my matches where my opponent thought that Eknoa had to gain 5k on the first attack, even if you don't counterblast one to discard, and that's not the case. So one of the things that you can do is that it's not always great to do, like, you know, you want to have Eknoa be 15 whenever she can, but if you don't have the cards to discard, because you know your hand is like specific pieces or you're looking for like other things, but you still want to use Eknoa's draw effect later on, you can swing with her for just 10 or 20 into rear, not use the effect at all, not gain the 5k, and then when you re-sand her with Fractile, you can then on the second attack counterblast 1, discard 1 to draw 2 cards and gain the 5k. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I did it quite a few times because, you know, my hand wasn't great. I was hoping to get drive checks and then discard the drive checks for Eknoa to find better shield value like PGs or crits. So that's something that does come up. There'll be a way you can do that. Of course, obviously, if you're not on Persona Ride, 15 into rear versus 10 into rear, you'd always rather go 15 into rear if you can. Yeah, in terms of strategy, there's not much more. Just like I said, you want to be early rushing because the more damage they're on going into your grade 3 and grade 4 turns, the more threatening your big Fractile and Matter Red turns are. If they're on, like, say, 1 or 2 damage, it's a lot easier for them to no-guard the Fractile swing, even though your Vanguard is a crit, because then they can bank on defensives to guard your rear guards off the back of that, especially if you don't have Persona Ride. In terms of matchups, I posted like a tweet to, you know, like what I played against. They were all mostly interesting decks. I got quite lucky to dodge the Bruce matchup, and I think Bruce is one of the harder matchups for this deck. You know, second hardest probably, first being Meteors, which I did lose to, and I beat some, but I lost mostly to them. The things about those matchups in particular is that a lot of the times my opponents weren't really able to properly respond to my early rushing. I think there was only 1 or 2 games in the entire tournament where my grade 2 turn was just ride grade 2 attack pass. I think pretty much every game I was calling down a body to beat with, and sometimes it did bite me in, you know, it did come back to haunt me because quite a lot, especially in top 8, I attacked and my opponent hit the first defensive, and I pulled 2 rear guards. In fact, I had grade 2 Vanguard and 2 Audreys in the front row. So I went Vanguard swing because I was fishing for overtrigger, hit nothing, they hit a defensive, my turn ended, and I was just left with these 2 5k shield on the board that, you know, I did intercept away with, but knowing that they could have done more later on if I'd held them for the combo turn, you know, it's rushing like isn't a guaranteed payoff. You want to be rushing, but it can lose you the game if you're a bit unlucky or you're not careful how doing it, was the point I was trying to make. Yeah, beyond that, like I said, just guarding early so you don't damage Romantic Happiness is sometimes also really good. And knowing that you need damage to be able to A, flip Loronerol and then draw cards off of Eknoa, you're going to be tempted to take a lot of damage that you wouldn't need to take otherwise. Like, obviously you want 1 damage so that you can flip Happiness on turn 3, but between turn 3, 4, and 5, you actually want to be guarding super aggressively because those are the turns where you're going to be farming the most hand and drawing the most cards to throw away for guard. And you want to be staying low enough on damage that you can still use Loronerol's Sing effect, because you don't need Eknoa as much. Like, sure, drawing cards is great, but the lower the damage you stay on, the more damage you can take later on when it's going to be harder for you to guard things, when your opponent has more numbers, has more threat. And, you know, by doing that early guarding, it actually saves you pieces in the late game, because then if you don't need to use like Elmer straight away or don't need to use PG straight away, you can actually do things like commit them to the board to push when you need to, because you have that freedom, like going, well, even if I commit, like, say, a crit as a boost, or I commit Elmer and it gets retired during the main phase, you're not as reliant on that shield value as you were if you were on, say, 5, instead if you were on 3 or 4. So that's pretty much it. My games were pretty much straightforward. Overtrigger came up only like 2 or 3 times. I think like round 5 or 6. My opponent was like 2 to pass on grade 2 and I hit overtrigger on turn 2, and that did win me the game because having your rear guards constantly gain 10 is great. But in a lot of the games I played, I ended up just like drawing it, or like hitting it defensively when it didn't matter. So drawing it is great because it's 50k shield, but the actual impact of the trigger itself wasn't as huge. It wasn't as like game ruining as it could have been. Like I said, I ended up damaging it defensively on like the last attack of the turn more often than anything else. The rest of my games were mostly like, I got a little bit lucky here and there, but not massively. And one thing I did want to talk about is going first and going second. This deck can do both. You want to go first because it gives you tempo so that you can ride your Persona Ride, hit your grade 4, turn 4 fractal combo before your opponent had a chance to do much. But there are equally as many going for like active on turn 3 decks in the format now as there are turn 4. And sometimes actually against those decks, going second is ideal because you get an extra draw off your starter, you get an extra draw from Mana Red because when you ride grade 3 because your opponent will be grade 3. You can then just play 2 Mana Red on grade 3 to draw 2 extra cards. And having that massive amount of plus to just like survive up and sustain across their turn, and then you hit back and win once they've committed their resources, is still really useful. So it is mostly matchup dependent, but like I said, this deck can really play going first or second. It doesn't make a huge deal of difference. Yeah, beyond that, I didn't get that much more lucky. There is one thing I actually want to talk about specifically with the Gravidia matchup that came up twice. So I got lucky enough to play against Derek Dow and Nuno Raimundo, 2 of, in my opinion, the world's best players, and they were both playing a hybrid Gravidia list. And something that because I knew that in advance because it's open deck list, the first time I played them, I actually damage denied. Like, I rode grade 1, passed, rode grade 2, passed, so that their turn 2, they couldn't play Eclipse Moonlight to make a token, and that really like reduced their offensive pressure, mainly because by not having the extra 50k body on the board, they couldn't rush me as hard, which meant I didn't need to guard as hard, which means that when it came to their Persona Ride turns, even though they were wiping my board, I still had cards in hand that I can just guard with and like do things with. And worst case scenario, in fact, against Derek at the end of it, against Nuno, just before he decked out, I was able to just slam rear guards, and it was a 20k column because I had Persona Ride, and I could put triggers on it as well, and just that extra like 2 rear guards to stand to give 20k on Vanguard was enough to make the difference of a push. So, like I said, being able to maintain that tempo of like not wasting your cards early, even though you can easily refill with Eknoa, you want to retain that advantage lead for as long as physically possible. Of course, in games in the top 8, I drew a pretty good hand, so I was able to rush Nuno effectively because I drew both Elmer and Audrey, so I wasn't as afraid about committing one. And in that case, it worked out just as well. Even though he hit me quite hard with like 3 15k rear guards on turn 2, I was able to survive. And even though my rebuild was shaky with Eknoa, I still got there because he ended up being unable to guard Laura because he just didn't draw his triggers. But in general, it comes down to that risk, that calculated risk of, do I rush now or do I hold my pieces for later? And especially in the case of these Gravidia decks that use Eclipse Moonlight, you can definitely spend like a few minutes thinking like, okay, if I damage deny them, they're going to be on low damage, which means they'll be on like 2 or 3 damage going into turn 4, which means the Madder Red Fractal combo might not be as threatening or lethal or potent, but is that worth it so that I can then play a slower game and not have to deal with getting rushed on turn 2? Or if I rush on turn 2, can I deal with the Shadow Army token immediately? Can I deal with Destiny Jade immediately? Can I deal with having my board wiped by meteors? These are things that you need to consider just yourself going into that. Beyond that, I'm quite excited to see how the deck improves going forward with Lyrical Set 2. I have no idea what I want. Maybe something else that uses Soul to countercharge. That'd be great. If not, some way of searching for these would be cool. Or some other grade 2 order that's actually good going first, so that you can, instead of just feeling, okay, I feel like I've wasted a card draw and sometimes I just don't need the crit. But beyond that, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the deck. I've talked about the main choices being Audrey and draw triggers. Any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I will have a read of them, and I try to reply to most comments on this channel. And beyond that, as always, thank you very much. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. If not, no worries. Subscribe to the channel, follow us on Twitter, socials in the description below. Once again, thank you to all my opponents who I played against, and thank you for the staff running a huge event. Hopefully, Tony should be editing and uploading the highlight reel / montage of my games at some point in the coming days / weeks. So keep an eye out for that. It'll definitely be linked in the description as well as on the channel, so definitely subscribe if you want to watch that. And as always, shout out to the sponsor, Strictly Broken TCG. They did not provide me with these cards, one of my friends in my local area did. But if I knew that I wanted to play Loro, I probably would have bought from Strictly Broken. But if you want to pick up Lyrical 2 when it eventually comes out, feel free to head to strictlybroken.tcg.ca and use my promo code SBTCGYellowcard for a 5% discount site-wide on both singles and pre-orders, Vanguard and Y Shorts. So yeah, once again, thank you to everyone, my buddies, my different fights, Solemn, all the boys in Sweaty Squad, the boys in the Echo Chamber, just everyone who I can still share this game and this victory with. Being able to talk to friends and be like, congratulations, or you got this. That people tell me like, no, you got to stay up until midnight to play. Like, you're winning, man. Good job, stuff like that. It's a really special feeling. And so for those of you who are watching this at home, you're looking like, I wish I could do something like this. Talk to your friends. Talk to as many people as possible. Like, build that sort of camaraderie between each other. And even if you don't win events, even if you don't top, it'll still feel like you're winning. So that's all I have to say for today. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully we'll see you on the next video. Take care.